Welcome to Honor Over Death, where we dissect ancient history's greatest battles. From Egypt's battle at Megido against the Hittites to Napoleon's victory over Russia at Borneo, we will dive deep into the strategies and tactics used by each battlefield commander to discuss what can be learned and how it may apply to you today. Without further ado, let's get into our first video. Today, we will be discussing the Battle of Bibracte in 58 BC. This engagement pits Rome's Julius Caesar against the Helvetii tribe in Cisalpine Gaul, modern-day France and Switzerland. Before we get started, let us first acknowledge our sources for today's video. First, we have 58 BC, the Battle of Bibracte by Anthony Holland. This is a quick, short read that's great at building context for events surrounding Bibracte. Lastly, and most importantly, we have the Gallic Wars by Julius Caesar. This is a first-hand account of the Battle of Bibracte by Julius Caesar himself. Some unit numbers and events may have been embellished, but it's a solid account nonetheless. Beginning with Caesar, and in the years leading up to the Battle of Bibracte, Caesar spent the majority of his time making his way up Rome's political ladder, acquiring significant debt in the process. During this time in Rome, it was very expensive to run for office and receive the support necessary to win a consulship. In 60 BC, at the ripe age of 40 years, Caesar ran for the position of consul, supported by his two allies, Pompey the Great and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Together, these three men formed what was known as the Triumvirate. Through political persuasion and assistance from his allies, he was able to obtain a proconsulship of Cisalpine Gaul on the other side of the Alps and a command of Transalpine Gaul, now modern-day France. This not only allowed him to pay off his debts by levying taxes, but also forge his legacy as a great military commander, spurred on by the thoughts of Alexander the Great's victories in Persia. Caesar was a man on a mission. He already obtained the power he required in Rome. Now he just needed an enemy and a victory to win the fame. Unlike Caesar's own accounts, there is little written about the Helvetii. Most of our knowledge comes from the archaeological record and what the Romans recorded themselves. We know that they were a tribal confederation that consisted of about 4 different tribes which settled near the Swiss plateau and the northern portion of the Alps. The Helvetii were considered a strong, battle-hardened people due to the constant warring and raiding between tribes. During the Cimbrian Wars in 107 BC, the Tigurini clan of the Helvetian tribe defeated a Roman army at the Battle of Bibracte. Its commander, Lucius Cassius Longinus, and Lucius Calpurnius Piso were both killed in the fighting. Piso was the grandfather to Caesar's father-in-law of the same name. This gave Caesar his first reason to despise the Helvetii. The Helvetii tribe was ruled by a noble class and a group of religious leaders, the Druids. Years before the Battle of Bibracte, a nobleman named Orgetorix proposed an idea to move the entire tribe, consisting of around 300,000 people, west near Transalpine Gaul. Surrounded on all sides from hostile tribes and a growing population, the other noblemen agreed, and the Helvetii began 2 year-long preparations to leave. In a show of strength and resolve, the Helvetii burned all their villages and towns so that they had no option but to move westward. After securing permission from local tribes to pass through their land, the entire tribe pushed south through the northernmost Roman province. As the Helvetii pushed toward Geneva, Caesar received word that a massive Helvetian convoy was advancing towards the Roman province of Provincia. Caesar was only able to muster 1 legion in support. This meager force was not nearly enough to stop the tribe, so he ordered the bridge across the Rhone River destroyed. The Helvetii would need to cross the river if they were going to make it to their new home. With the river destroyed, the Helvetii were forced into diplomacy with Caesar. They gave assurances that if they were allowed to pass through Provincia, they would not cause any undue trouble. Caesar, ever the masterful tactician, asked for a month to consider their offer. During that time, Caesar built an 18-mile long and 16-foot high fortification around the Rhone River. This included towers, fortifications, and an entrenchment system that completely closed off Provincia. Once the works were completed, Caesar rejected their offer and officially kicked off hostilities. The Helvetii attempted to make several crossings, but were ultimately unsuccessful. Stumped near Geneva, the Helvetii were forced to move north and barter a deal with the Sequani tribe for safe passage. Caesar ran south and left one of his lieutenants, Titus Labienus, in charge of guarding the fortifications at Geneva. Despite his diplomatic victory, he did not want a warring tribe on his northwest border and was determined to stop them completely. Caesar mobilized 5 fresh legions from northern Italy and marched back across the Alps, fighting several local tribes as he went. Once Caesar returned, the Helvetii had already passed through the land of the Sequani and were pillaging the Aedui tribe. The Aedui could not properly defend themselves and sent emissaries to Caesar pleading for help. Rather than guarding the territory of Provincia, Caesar decided to push beyond its borders and confront the Helvetii at the river Arar, today known as the River Seiwan. Upon Caesar's arrival at the river Arar, he was informed by his spy network that the Helvetii had already crossed a total of 3/4 of their population. Caesar seized this opportunity and struck the remaining Helvetii that had yet to cross the river. Caesar most likely formed his men into 3-line formations, with archers and slingers in support. The Helvetii had no choice but to turn and face the predator eagle at their back. Caught completely by surprise and encumbered by all their baggage, they were completely destroyed. Any surviving Helvetii routed into the woods or were cut down as they fled. After the battle had ended, Caesar ordered his legions to construct a bridge across the RR River. The Romans were able to complete the bridge and transport some 40,000 men across in just one day. Seeing this, the remaining Helvetii once again sent ambassadors to Caesar, offering to settle their tribe in a separate location of Caesar's own design, if Caesar would stop harassing them. Keeping in remembrance of the injustices done to the Romans at the Battle of Bibracte, Caesar denied their offer. There was going to be no diplomatic solution. The Helvetii moved off from encampment and continued west towards Cisalpine Gaul. Caesar began to trail this large force and sent a contingent of 4,000 Gallic mercenary cavalry to recon the Helvetii's movements. The cavalry's loyalty would come under question given that their leader Dumnorix was the son-in-law to the late Orgetorix, a former nobleman of the Helvetii. The cavalry came into contact with a much smaller 500-man Helvetii cavalry force. Considering the odds, Dumnorix decided to engage. As the battle ensued, the unfavorable terrain and possibly the loyalty of his men led Dumnorix to retreat and withdraw from the battlefield. Emboldened by their victory over the Roman cavalry, the Helvetii began to harass Caesar's forces as he shadowed the main Gallic army. After 2 weeks of maintaining a 5 to 6 mile distance between each component, Caesar was beginning to run low on food supplies. He reached out to his Gallic allies, the Aedui and Liscus, their chief magistrate, who had promised to support him through this campaign. Caesar suspected that both tribes were actively working together to hinder the Roman army. Caesar also deduced that his cavalry commander, Dumnorix, was behind this plot, since he had direct ties to the Aedui and Helvetii. Liscus told Caesar that Dumnorix did not want the Romans to prevail and feared the subjugation of all his peoples. Rather than punishing Dumnorix, Caesar pardoned him and placed him under surveillance for the duration of the campaign. Approximately 2 days before Caesar would need to issue rations to his men, he diverted his march from the Helvetii and headed towards the town of Bibracte, 18 miles away. Bibracte was a large Aedui town that would allow him to resupply his level of food supplies. Seeing Caesar retreat, and emboldened by their cavalry victory, the Helvetii struck camp on a hilltop and gave chase to Caesar with only warriors. Caesar ordered his Gallic cavalry to intercept the advancing Helvetii. This would give Caesar ample time to deploy his own forces on a hilltop adjacent to the Helvetii encampment. The cavalry charge, led by Dumnorix, had little effect, but did give Caesar the time he needed to deploy his units. After that point, the Roman cavalry would play no further part in the battle. Caesar deployed his forces on the upper slope of the hill with his most experienced legions in the front. He formed a three-lined formation with archers and auxiliary slingers taking up the rear and guarding all of the baggage. Once the Helvetii scattered the Gallic mercenary cavalry, they advanced across a plain between the two hilltops in phalanx-type formations. Caesar dismounted from his horse in a sign of personal courage and resolve towards his men. They knew that their leader would only accept victory or an honorable death. The Helvetii continued to march closer and closer to Caesar's formations. Once in range, the Roman archers and slingers began to pester the Helvetii formations. Undeterred, the Helvetii warriors marched closer until they reached javelin range of Caesar's forces. The entire Roman front line launched their javelins, pilas, at the advancing warriors. The pilas were very effective in that they would penetrate the Helvetii shields and bend. Subsequently, the warriors dropped their shields and continued their charge towards the Romans. After the javelin volley, the Romans drew their swords and charged down the hill towards their enemies. The combined arms effects of the slingers, archers, javelins, and melee troops had a devastating effect on the Helvetii. They sustained heavy casualties and began to give ground to the Romans. The Helvetii were known as some of the finest warriors amongst the Celtic tribes, and although they sustained many casualties, they did not turn and flee. After many hours of fighting, the Helvetii began to give way. The battle had begun around noon and continued into the hours of darkness. Many of the Helvetii and tribesmen continued to fight while some returned to their baggage to protect the women and children. Most continued to resist the iron machine that was the Roman military. Just as the Romans seemed to be gaining the upper hand in the engagement, an additional 15,000 tribesmen from the Boii and Tuolagi tribes appeared on the right flank of Caesar's lines. Seeing the threat, Caesar ordered his newest recruits along his third rear line to immediately engage the incoming forces. The Boii and Tuolagi experienced a barrage of arrows and javelins as they joined battle with the Romans. Despite the rawness of the rear legions, they were holding up well. Throughout the day and into the night, the Romans pushed them across the plain and up the adjacent hill to their camp. The Helvetii had established a ring of wagons, almost as a makeshift fortification. This was their last stand, their Alamo. Everything they held dear was in that circle of fortifications. They fought fiercely from atop and below the wagons. eventually Caesar's forces broke through and slaughtered all of the resistors. At one point in desperation, women and children picked up arms and resisted the Romans. None were spared. It was also reported that not one Helvetii warrior fled from battle. In total, approximately 2/3 of the Helvetii were destroyed at the Battle of Bibracte. The Romans only lost approximately 5,000 soldiers. After several days, Caesar pursued the remaining Helvetii. He eventually caught up with them and forced them to return to their original home and rebuild their villages. The Battle of Bibracte was one of Caesar's first major triumphs that won him significant support throughout the Roman Empire. But was it justified? Probably not. There is no doubt that Caesar played his part perfectly and made the correct decisions when faced with adversity. But the Helvetii were more than likely not the threat he portrayed them to be. To add on to that, the Helvetii, with some decisive decision-making and intelligence, could have defeated Caesar at the River Rhone, River RR, or at the Battle of Bibracte. This brings us to the final portion of the video. What can we learn? How can this apply to us today? Without providing our own input, we'd like to pose these questions to you, the listener, and ask that you include your answers to our questions in the comments.